Hi, my name is Bert, and this is the Still Life Podcast. What is going on, everybody? It is Friday, April 30th, 2021. Here we are, the end of the week. It is an absolutely gorgeous day outside today, and I'm about to go enjoy a little bit of fishing. You know, I've enjoyed fishing all of my adult life, really. Kind of got started when I was a teenager. Always had an interest in it, always enjoyed the outdoors, being around the water. But it's been within about the past 5 or so years that I've actually started to learn how to fish. Before, it was just I would go buy random things when I went to Bass Pro or Dick's or Walmart or wherever, and just kind of throw things in the water and see what happened. Or I would just throw a bobber and a hook on and a worm or a minnow or some crappie bait and just kind of hope for the best. But like I said, about 5 years ago, I actually started studying how to fish, namely because I wanted to get better at fishing for 2 different species, particularly crappie and largemouth bass. So, of course, I did what any normal person who wants to learn something new does. I spent hours upon hours upon hours going through rabbit hole after rabbit hole of YouTube videos. In addition to that, I spent a lot of time on the Bass Pro website. Now, I will say, unfortunately for me, currently Bass Pro is not a sponsor of this podcast, but I worked there for a short time, and in doing so, I learned about the OneSource website that is a part of the regular Bass Pro Shops website. And there's a lot of tips and tricks from professional anglers, what colors to use, what jigs to use, what time of year to use them, you know, the places to fish, what to look for, and all these different things. So I really jumped in with both feet and just started reading and taking in as much information as I could. And wouldn't you know, within just weeks of starting my journey down this path, getting deeper into angling and chasing largemouth bass, I was starting to see success. Switching up colors and using certain jigs in certain areas of the water. Within the first year, really, of changing up how I approached my fishing and really learning how to fish, I was seeing consistent success, and I was bagging 2 to 3 pound bass pretty consistently over the last several years. Now, what that led me to do is realize that I had all this gear that I didn't know how to use. So I went through my big tackle bag, cleaned everything out, got rid of a ton of stuff, and really pared it down to things that I knew would work in the bodies of water that I fished in. Now, fast forward a few years later, that tackle bag is now full again, but it's all things that I know I will have success with. So I'm kind of right back to where I started, but I know what gear I have and I know exactly how to use it. Now, with that said, I had to start a new bag this season, so I now have a dedicated bass bag and a dedicated crappie/panfish bag. So depending on what I feel like going fishing for on a given day, or if I want to fish for everything, I can just grab my bag or bags and go. Everything is organized. I know what's in each one of my trays. I have Ziploc bags with each type of plastic. So I've got swim baits, finesse worms, my Sticko or Senko worms, and then creatures, and then a bag for crawfish, crayfish, crawdads, whatever you want to call them. And I will say, since I've started learning how to fish, you know, it was kind of this progression of I didn't know what I didn't know, and then I knew what I didn't know, and that was a very daunting place to be. You know, walking down the fishing section at Bass Pro, and you see these aisles and aisles of, you know, swim baits, plastics, spinner baits, crank baits, you know, all these different things. And I had no clue where to even start and was just overwhelmed at the massive selection of baits to use for just bass fishing, period. And really, as I started to dig in and started to figure out what works for me, where I fish, those aisles became smaller and smaller and smaller. And I now understand, what I'm looking for, what color, the length, what style, the hooks that I need to use, all these different things now completely make sense to me. And, so it makes fishing a lot more fun, and it also makes the shopping a little easier and a little bit more enjoyable. But really, I feel like with fishing, the more things change, the more they really truly stay the same. I've got a handful of colors that I use when it comes to my hard baits and when it comes to my soft plastics. And they always work, so I don't need to deviate from that. Now I will try different plastics, different creatures, different lengths of worms or Senkos, so on and so forth. And I'll always try new stuff that comes out because you never know what that big PR bass is going to bite on. So, it's kind of a constant game. I know what works consistently, but I got to figure out how to bag that big old bass. So, I continue to learn every day, watch a lot of YouTube videos. I enjoy fishing with Norm, fishing with Yak Pack and Lojo, and then AO fishing as well. Those tend to be the guys that I watch on a regular basis. They're all Googan guys. They're entertaining. They're fun to watch, but I also generally learn some new things when I watch those guys' videos. So if fishing is something that you're interested in and you want to learn, like I said, I would suggest starting out really with Bass Pro Shops One Source site and just reading through the tips and tricks from the pros, and then check out YouTube. Like I said, check out those guys that I mentioned. There's a lot of guys out there that put out great content. Intuitive Angling, I do watch that. Randy has been a pro since like the 80s and really knows his way around a largemouth bass. He's another great one that I look at as well. So, like I said, don't be afraid to dive in, and the more you learn, the more enjoyable fishing can be. So I appreciate y'all listening today and joining me on the Still Life Podcast. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will catch y'all on Monday. And remember, for questions, comments, topic ideas, or suggestions, or if you'd like to sponsor the Still Life Podcast, you can always reach us at thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. That's thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening to the Still Life Podcast. We'll talk again soon.